Well, we're in this region, so I think, first of all, we should focus on the left-outs, if you like, and that's the Western Balkan countries, Turkey, and left-outs in other ways, also left out of this SAFE program, UK and Turkey, not really included in that in any kind of full way. So I guess the question is, is the EU, if we're looking for in this new context and the idea of a more geopolitical EU, is the EU not shooting itself in the foot by actually not doing more to integrate these countries, which are in the front line, which have a contribution to make, which actually, if we're talking about Western Balkans, are not going to cost too much. They're small. Okay, they're going to be net recipients, but they're pretty small compared with others who've joined in previous waves. And the effect of the kind of disengagement over many years is that people have become cynical. They don't believe anymore that it's going to happen, and so reforms come to a standstill. So it's a kind of two-way relationship there. It takes two to tango, if you like. So who wants to talk about that? Because if the Western Balkans aren't going to join, when is Ukraine going to join? When can Turkey join? So what's a realistic plan? Tomi?
John, very shortly, just to what Professor said. For example, Western Balkans, as you, John, mentioned, the logic would be for geopolitical reasons, looking what is happening, we should take them in as quickly as possible. But the challenge with the European Union is that it's a democracy, and the citizens' opinion matters. Martens Centre, what we did a couple of years ago, and I think it's still very valid, we made a polling about citizens about enlargement. So first of all, the three short conclusions. First of all, people want to be informed about those countries, and they want to be involved in decision making. And third, it was very clear that we cannot do any more about this kind of big political, like 20 years ago, for political reasons, because people have experience on enlargement, so it needs to be merit-based process. So that's very clear. The economic factors and conditions matters. So that already said certain. So how one can see the enlargement, it really needs, it demands the progress from the countries itself. That is the condition which we cannot bypass for political reasons.
Okay, fair point. Mr. Bağış, I wanted to bring in you on Turkey. I mean, it seems to me it's unrealistic to expect that Turkey is going to be, after what the recent history, that it's going to be joining. But the question is, what does Turkey want from the EU? Obviously, more serious engagement. You outlined what Turkey has to offer to a more geopolitical EU in terms of defense capability and other things, many other things. But what is it that you would want to see? And what do you see as feasible, realistic, actually, for Turkey?
Let me be very frank. The accession process is not a technical one. It's a political one.
Sure.
We all know millions of Eastern Germans became full and equal members of European Union overnight without going through any negotiation or chapters or this or that, because politically that was needed. Now we're approaching a period where politically Europe really needs to wake up. Today, Europe needs Turkey a lot more than Turkey needs Europe. We have alternatives. Europe has to think, how many alternatives do they have? Realistically, looking at the globe, looking at the developments and map. So no one should expect Turkey to carry Europe's burdens while denying her a seat at the table. If we are asked to contribute, then we have to be a part of the decision-making process. Now, European Union has candidate countries, negotiating countries, and member countries. Maybe it's time to ask the question of creating different membership types. And that might somehow comfort some of the existing members. But realistically, without UK, without Turkey, without Switzerland, without Norway, many European projects could be endangered. So Europe has to understand, we are not Europe's neighbor. Turkey is Europe and part of her future. And we are willing to contribute, but it takes two to tango.
Yeah. I don't know if Dimitri is still on the line, but he might want to say something on this. He may have had to go because we're running over, but just to give the opportunity to come in.
I'll be very short. First of all, I had worked on this, on the enlargement as European Commissioner. I have been in all countries in the region in order to see on the ground how all these reforms are taking place. Because it is true to say that the European Union has put some benchmarks on all these countries aspire to become members of the European Union, including Turkey. Starting from Turkey, I can tell you that during my tenure, Turkey had made a great progress in meeting all benchmarks in order to acquire, to be granted visa waiver, which would be a very first step. Approximately, and Egemen can correct me if I'm wrong, 87% of these benchmarks had been met. Everything stopped for other reasons, geopolitical and political. The same is with the other countries in the wider region of the Balkans. All these countries are aspired to become members. And believe me, I was always a proponent and advocating for that. They have also to make progress in certain areas, rule of law, democratic function of the system, and of course, to stop the expansion of nationalism in the Balkans. I remind you that the term Balkanization in the diplomatic vocabulary means revert to ethnic, religious rivalries, and the world has suffered from the nationalism in this area. Nowadays, with what's happening in Europe, there is a lot of skepticism, even between these countries, whether they should join or not the European Union. So we have to see the larger picture. First of all, the question, does Europe need the so-called Western Balkans between us? I don't know who named them Western Balkans. I mean, it's a very vague, let's say, definition. But beyond that, it's true to say that Balkans were always part of Europe. The same is with Turkey. I'll tell you, Turkey, if you take a look back in its history, it was always looking towards Europe at that time, historically speaking. But they have to do all the great efforts. Regarding Turkey now, Turkey has made a great progress, no doubt about it. And it's a big country. It became even bigger during our days. But they have also to respond to some specific pending issues in the region. I come back to what I always say. It is in the benefit of Turkey to proceed the solution of the Cyprus issue. It's a pending issue, and the Europeans are very sensitive on that, not only Greece, but also the Europeans. And on the other hand, in the Balkans, corruption has to be fought in a very, very radical way. Whether we want to admit it or not, most of the countries in the region are confronted with this question. So the answer is yes, they have to find the door open, but they have to fulfill and complete their homework in order to be ready to to cross the threshold of the European Union. Europe needs all these countries in order to become more complete. And it will take some time, but let's hope that at the end, this is what will prevail.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. So, God, we're really out of time, but I just wanted to come back to the question of a sovereign Europe and agency, the issue that you raised, General Sanders. So you emphasize that really, that the importance of assuming responsibility, taking control, agency, that it can be done. Obviously, it's easier for a nation state to do that. It's not so easy for a bloc of more than 24 member states to do it. So what is stopping Europe from moving in this direction? Just to give an opportunity to you to come back on that yourself, or Tomi or Othon, just some very quick points just to bring us into the coffee break. Literally a minute. I
was going to say, how long have we got? Because that's a question that you can't answer
very
in
we
what
can
looks
carry
to
on
be
discussing
19 seconds. Monet said that Europe responds best in a crisis, or it's the sum of all the collective responses that lead to that response. I just don't think we recognize the crisis. And there are plenty of historical examples of countries, states coming together in alliances to overcome autocracies, to overcome dictatorships. But it's so much better to prevent it from happening in the first place. And that is what our focus should be on. And we know what needs to be done. We absolutely know what needs to be done. And funnily enough, it's not a shortage of capital. It's a shortage, as Dimitri Kuleba said, of will, and primarily will to strip back the regulation that is preventing Europe behaving collectively and consolidating. Because if we don't, history is not going to judge us well.
Thanks. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would like to add something, and I wanted to connect it with the previous discussion on the economy. Because at the end of the day, if the EU is to define its own strategic autonomy, that we all realize that it's the imperative for the future, we have to have the economy coming back. And it was good that we had that discussion before, because we need to be very concrete about how do you kind of bring back the Eurozone into force.
Thanks. We have to break. Tomi, if it's like 10 seconds, you got it. That's it.
I think it's very easy and very difficult. I think we have to go back to basics to build build our defense and build our economy. As we discussed yesterday, we have to go much more pro-market, pro-business. I think that was what we have been missing last 10 years or more.
Okay, lovely. Well, thanks very much to all our panelists.